My next question is, how was marriage viewed for women in the 60s and was it encouraged?
Right. I don't know about being encouraged. It was always the case that it was traditional. And in the early 60s, certainly, it was still traditional and for life. So divorce was too costly. Hardly anybody got divorced. If you were being beaten up every day, it didn't matter. You couldn't really get divorced. It was quite shocking, really. But church weddings, mainly, whatever your denomination, and it would all be through the processes with the banns being read and, all the rest of it, and always traditional to wear white for purity and all that. Very rare that another colour would be worn. So we're still in this 40s, 50s traditional sort of women in marriage, family sort of set up. Later in the 60s, it was a bit less formal. Floppy hats, occasionally, instead of veils. Cream, possibly, not white, but not patterns or anything. What happened with the aristocracy, I don't know. That's, I just don't know. But this is my experience. And this was interesting because there was a girl in my class at school. We were doing A-levels. And I remember her name, but I won't mention it, obviously. And she had to leave school due to pregnancy. And she wasn't showing or anything. And there'd been, I don't know who told us, because generally sex education wasn't handled very well at all. And all of a sudden she wasn't there. No opportunities for her to stay on at school until the end or whatever. So it's a shame, but that's how it was then. It was frowned on to be pregnant if you weren't married. Later on, however, in about 1968, I was living in a flat at Portsmouth, and the girl upstairs got pregnant, but she did get married, and we went to her wedding, and she was wearing cream, and there was less of a stigma. And of course, we were university students, so we weren't looking at it in the way that perhaps traditional people were, because we were lucky that we would have been encouraged to think outside boxes and, and discuss these things.
Have more of an open mindset.
Yeah, spot on, enlightened, yeah. So, yes, and I think I just mentioned I went with friends to a talk on the pill, which was organised by the college, I think. But I have to say that I'm aware that some religions and cultures were still extremely strict at that time. And I know that Irish Catholic girls had the most terrible time because it was regarded not just as unfortunate but as a sin. And some of them were banged into these laundries for years as a punishment. And I think they were only closed, the last one closed in about 1980-something or 90-something. Absolutely hideous. And whether you were raped or not, and that's what caused your pregnancy, it was the woman who was blamed.
Because she got pregnant.
Yeah. Terrible, really. And of course other people's families might differ depending on the upbringing and position in society. Again, it would be easier for the richer to sort of send your pregnant daughter off somewhere, and very often throughout history, if a girl got pregnant, the parents might actually take on the child as their own, and the child might never know that it was their sister that was the mother. So there's a lot of fuzziness over this question. But marriage in the 60s, getting back to the subject, was still supposed to come before having children. And within marriage, going back to the title, women were still often at home, bringing up the children, cooking the meals, keeping the house tidy, the men going out to work. It was different if you were divorced or bereaved, because you wouldn't have any choice. The social services weren't anything like they are now, and deprivation would have been, terrible. So some women were working very hard, but it was because of unfortunate circumstances, not choice, if you see what I mean. With my generation, we were possibly around the first that weren't necessarily wanting marriage. we were getting an education to get a decent job and not be dependent on a man. Although in some areas tradition is still that way. When I go to Birmingham to stay with my former neighbour sometimes, their still whole family is very traditional. The kids got married early. They still got married before having the children. They still all live within a stone's throw of each other. They've all had children and grandchildren, and they're all to get together and help each other out. So again, I have to say it depends what your culture is within Britain. You know, I can't generalise. So overall, some changes in the 60s, maybe a bit less formal, and there was certainly a breaking of sexual taboos during this decade. So it wasn't deemed, the older generation would think it was wrong for all this free love and burning your bra and desire for freedom and music festivals and experience and so on. But that's what was becoming in. And that's why I mentioned Bob Dylan, The Times They Are A-Changing, because there was a bit of a sense of rebelliousness against everything that had been before. So in my answers to you, Fabian, I'll be cross-referencing because it's an amalgam of society change in every respect.